Hey, what's going on, Teach Better fam? It's Chris here, and I am bringing you a bonus episode from last weekend's Admin Mastermind Rewind and live Q&A bi-weekly family check-in with Rae Hughart and Dave Schmittou. We hope you enjoy the awesome conversations and discussions that took place last weekend during this event, and we hope that you follow us in the future. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube and Twitter for any of these events coming up at Teach Better Team. We hope you enjoy this episode and hope it brings a lot of positivity to start your week.
Hey everyone, we're so excited to be here. Dave, how is your Sunday going? Are you ready to hang out with me on Sunday?
I am ready to join Beyonce here. Yes, that's what I feel like this is. I am in the Super Bowl halftime show with you guys. This is exciting. As long as I can be Prince, which I think was the greatest halftime show ever, you guys can be wherever you would be. It's fun.
I love it. I love it. We're going to have so much conversation tonight with, recapping that Admin Mastermind that's been going on. We're going to be taking your questions live. If you're here with us, please feel free to comment. Tell us who you're rooting for the football game, because I know that was a topic of discussion. And Michelle and I had a great conversation earlier this week that we then wanted to bring here and share here as well. Michelle, before we get started, will you tell us, who are you? What do you do in education? Tell us all the things.
Hi, I'm Michelle Simmons. I am a middle school teacher at a 612 building. I teach 6th grade science, 7th and 8th grade intro to leadership, and 8th grade AVID.
Oh, so fun. So good. Michelle, you and I had a phone call earlier this week where we were talking about grading, assessment, and feedback. And you had so many questions because you were approaching this like a learner, like how every educator should, saying, I want to be better in this area. Here's what I've done. And then here's what I still have questions on. Can you point me in the right direction? And to be honest, one of the best things we can do as we're starting to learn something is have continuous conversations about it. So before we get started with the questions that I know you're thinking in your mind, Michelle, will you tell us, what topic are you exploring? What have you done prior to us talking now that maybe got your feet wet in this idea? And then we can get into all the good stuff.
So I'm working on standards-based grading and then how to give effective feedback with my students on whether or not they've met the standards and how they're doing, how they're progressing. Our district provided us some professional development on remote learning and how to do that, and standards-based grading kind of came into that. And so we talked about it quite a bit this summer. I've read a few books on it, and I am a member of the Teach Better Academy. So I've done some of the standards-based grading academy classes as well.
Cool.
So.
Dave,
can I just tell you right now, I have chills. This is so stinking exciting. This is amazing. There's virtually nothing can pull me away from the Super Bowl. But when Rae says, can we talk grading and assessment and just have that conversation? Yes. Michelle, I am so excited for this. Yay for you. You're like my champion right now. This is so good. So good.
I knew you were going to like this, Dave, because when she called me, Michelle, we had a great conversation, but your follow-up was, what's next for me? You've done all these steps, but you still have questions, like many of us do, about all the things we're still learning about. And you were like, I really need some more coaching. And so, hi, welcome, Dave Schmittou. I'm connecting you guys. This is what we're doing.
Awesome.
Rae, do you mind if I ask a couple of questions just so I can kind of figure out where we're going with this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Michelle, you said you're in a 612 building.
Yes.
Is it a middle school and a high school, or is it like a seamless 612? Everybody is kind of on the same page.
It's pretty seamless. Yeah, we're trying to gel it together a little bit more, but yeah, that's the intent.
Okay. And do you have teams or pods or anything like that where there's common practice amongst disciplines, or does every teacher have autonomy to grade and assess the way that they want?
We're trying to work on the pod and get together, but it's a long journey, but we're working on it.
Perfect. Okay. And so your questions, just so I'm clarifying, are really for you and your class. We're not looking at how do we transition the entire school, or how do we get everybody on board? It's how you, as a middle school teacher, provide better feedback for your students, and then ultimately also provide grades that are aligned to standards. Is that fairly accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
That's accurate.
And what I love in our conversation, Michelle, is obviously when you took the Academy course, it did focus a lot on developing some sort of progression in how you're giving students feedback on their learning, right? So we talked about like having a certain scale, maybe like a 4, 3.5, 3, 2. We were talking about how you could begin to connect the numerical numbers you give a student and the vocabulary that's actually associated with that truly gives a student feedback on their understanding. And what I loved about our conversation is as you were diving into that, you were like, all right, so all those logistics I understand, but the part that I care about is the feedback I'm providing to students. And I thought that was so important that you're not just trying to check the box to say, hey, I'm doing standard-based grading. I have a scale that I use and students are getting a grade, but you're really focused on trying to actually get students value when you provide them some sort of feedback and ensure that it's feedback that helps their understanding level.
Right. Yeah, I want them to understand that this is a journey and that they're going to be working on that no matter if they have the grade or not. We're still working on that the entire year. So yeah, I definitely want to make sure they have feedback so they can keep pushing themselves.
All right,
Dave.
Michelle, I'm going to give you the hardest question of the day. Okay.
Oh man.
If standards-based grading, if your proficiency on standards-based grading were a 4-point scale, what grade do you give yourself?
For standards-based grading?
Yeah. And I'm going to pause you right there. You don't even have to answer. That pause was what I was looking for. The fact that you're breaking it down thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many components to this. Where do I even go? Right? Right? I think that's the first awareness that we have to have in this whole conversation is all of the components that are a part of standards-based grading and every standard and every progression. So I wanted you to have that register right away that you are in this progression, and that's totally fine.
Oh yeah.
Every single student you have is in a progression in meeting mastery. I see, Rae, you've got something to say already. The fingers on your cheek. So here we go.
I actually have a question for you, Dave, because I want to know, as you're thinking through all the pieces of standard-based grading, what are the pieces that educators listening right now should be thinking about? Like, clearly there's so many, but could you name a few of the multitude of pieces that educators need to be thinking through?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say the first one is when we say standards-based grading, the base is a very important piece of this. Standards grades, having grades that represent standards, is not an answer to any problem. It is simply one piece of the puzzle, and it's the first domino that will start uncovering everything you do. When you say I'm going to convert to standards-based grading, it's to help uncover other problems. So only enter into those waters if you're willing to lift up the rug and look at all the dirt that you've brushed underneath, because everything is going to be uncovered. It's not the solution. It is literally the first domino. That's one thing. The second piece that you're going to want to explore, in 6th grade as a middle school teacher, did you know in 6th grade there are 257 standards in the 4 core subject areas that students have to master? 257. Yes, it is. And if you just take the math, 257 standards, if you had school for 180 days, meaning no hybrid days, no part-time days, no snow days, no teacher absences, if a student is truly there for 180 days, that means a student is being expected to master a standard every 0.7 days. Not happening. None of us master anything in 0.7 days. So one of the foundational pieces in standards-based grading is identifying what are the essential standards before you start saying, we're going to start plowing through everything and just covering everything again, because you'll never get to master efficiency, whatever the case may be. So focus on that focus, identify which of those 257 we're going to be focusing on, and then go from there.
So good. That's what kicks all this off is when you start to break down all of standard-based grading, what it can include, what it should include, where you begin, where you want to end. It's such a fluid process of learning, and every educator's in a different spot. And so, Michelle, when we were speaking on the phone earlier this week, you really were looking for coaching on feedback. And so, do you remember how you got started in really ensuring that you were providing feedback, valuable feedback, targeted feedback to your students? Do you remember that process?
Yeah. Rick Wormley, one of my favorite people on the planet, he's the guy that slapped me across the face with a lot of my malpractice, a lot of things that I did wrong. And he's a standards-based grading guru. And he was notorious for making a statement. The statement that he made was a grade is simply shorthand for feedback you should have already provided. If you're putting a grade on a paper thinking that is the feedback, then you've already missed the mark. So you should have already provided feedback, and that whatever the grade is, whether it's a sticker, a check mark, an A+, a 3, whatever it is, it's simply shorthand for stuff that matters. So don't try to water things down by saying, I'm going to put a 3 on a paper and that's going to mean more to a kid than a B. No, it's not. Don't put a sticker on a paper and think that's going to mean something different. No, it's not. You should have already provided some feedback. And that other thing is just confirmation or reiteration or redundancy for whatever else you've already provided.
Michelle, what are your thoughts on that?
That's awesome. I love it. Now I want to know how.
Well, and it's funny, Michelle, when you say that, now I want to know how. I think a lot of educators feel that way. They start to read about this practice. They start to chew on these ideas and they say, hey, I care about students. I want them to be successful. This makes sense. But then as we start looking at our practices, we're trying to essentially find the time in what we're currently doing to then put this into practice. And I think the struggle that I find is that actually to get where we want to get, we have to change so many things about our practice to find the time and the skill to be able to do this effectively, which is kind of where we ended our phone call, Michelle, which is why we're here on this call. So that's a perfect segue. Dave, do you have any thoughts on that process?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different directions we can go. We'll start with baby steps. I'm going to say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's where a lot of people get into a lot of trouble. Is they say, but I give tests or quizzes every Friday because it's what I've always done. I'm going to scrap that and go to all projects and go to all rubrics, and then you get yourself completely overwhelmed. You have these rubrics or projects, and you don't know how to score them. You don't know how to grade them. Do you continue to do homework? Do you continue to do labs and practice work? Like, what gets graded and what doesn't? It just gets extremely overwhelming. So hold on to what you got. Let's align that. But you got to be comfortable saying, as you continue to grow and evolve, some of that stuff is going to continue to grow and evolve. So a case in point. One thing that I tell people is to always start with the power of 3. 3, if a student can show you 3 times in 3 ways that they've got something, they're proficient, they're masters, whatever it is. And by 3, that could mean 3 questions correct in a row. That could mean 3 projects, 3 different modalities, 3 different mediums. So if you're giving kids assignments, let's say that you have some sort of science quiz or science test or science homework tonight, and you're struggling through, do I give them 8 questions? Do I give them 10 questions? Do I give them 20 questions? Because those are all arbitrary. They're just numbers of problems that we throw out there that have nothing to do with proficiency and standards or anything. But when a student can get 3 in a row correct, they're done. If that means they answer the first 3 questions correct, they're done. If it takes them questions 17, 18, 19 to get 3 in a row, they're done. Question 98, 99, and 100 in a row, they're done. And all of those get the same score at the end because all 3 demonstrated that they learned something, they've mastered something, and they are proficient in the standard. So whether it takes 100 tries or 3 tries, 3 in a row, they're done.
Can I push back on that a little, Dave? Because
Yes,
I love that power of 3. I'm such a fan. I've heard you talk on this before. I want to preface for teachers, that really should hit a nerve to think about, then that better be the best 3 questions I have in my book. Because if you're asking 3 questions and after those 3 questions and the student gets them right, but after those 3 questions, you're like, wait, but those questions didn't have anything to do with what I actually wanted to confirm they knew. Yes. Well, then guess what? You asked the wrong question.
Yes, spot on. And that goes to that point of be ready because it's going to uncover a lot of what you do. Simply saying that these are 3 questions that are aligned to the standards. Okay, that is good. But are they truly at the level of the standard? And by the level of standard, we're talking Webb's or Bloom's. If it's analyze and synthesize, those better be the questions or the tasks you have kids doing. If you ask them 3 questions, asking them for definitions and recall, and that's not the standard, that means they did not meet the standard. They were discussing the topic, but not at the standard.
You know, Michelle, I didn't ask you, can you tell us about your classroom? What type of instructional strategies do you use right now in your classroom? Out of curiosity, are you somebody that, I know you teach a number of different topics. So like, are you, I do a mini lesson, then students practice that skill, and then we do a formative assessment kind of teacher? Are you like, how do you kind of structure typical day-to-day in your classroom?
That's very challenging right now, but on a typical typical classroom, it's usually mini lesson practice and formative assessment. But I again, watching the grid method and mastery learning, I'm trying to transition to that as well. So the students are able to practice and learn where they are, at their level.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I found a lot of teachers are feeling the same way, whether they're exploring standard-based grading or not, really just trying to find a structure where they can introduce an idea, have students practice the skill, and then give the teacher the time to actually confirm if they know it or not. And I know there's so many ways to teach out there, regardless of if you're listening right now. Everybody runs their classroom differently. Whether using the grid method or not, everybody runs their classroom differently. For me, a mastery framework like that, whether it just be like how you structure the day, the week, or the full unit, like the grid method was intended, it's really just shoring up your time as the teacher to kind of dive in and ask those questions that Dave is talking about. So not you specifically, Michelle, but anybody here, if you're thinking about, okay, my student needs to answer 3 questions successfully, or, I really need to make sure I'm asking the right questions at the right time to the student. Some of that does require the teacher to find some time to actually interact with students versus standing in the front of the class for 45 minutes and bestowing knowledge by talking at them, right? I mean, Dave, I know you've talked about this a ton.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'll give you another Schmittoism. There's no standard way to do standards-based grading.
That's true.
I mean, that is a Schmittoism through and through. And Michelle, I'm gonna when we're talking standards-based grading and feedback, we're talking through the assessment. So collecting student evidence of learning. How you then give kids that the practice of learning, that teacher autonomy needs to reign supreme. I've had some amazing teachers that lecture. I've had some amazing teachers that do authentic hands-on labs and learning experiences. So you do you register with what works best for your kids. Yeah. You just own it, have some passion, preach with hellfire and brimstone, whatever. You be you, and that will come through to the kids and they will learn. What we're really talking about right now is how to collect evidence of student learning. How do you take what they're putting out and say, yep, this is good, this is bad? How do we make sure that if the glove doesn't fit, we either don't acquit or we say, no, you're still guilty because I've got other evidence. That's all it is. We're trying to figure out guilt or innocence, proficient or not, master or not, and how close you are to reaching that level.
So good. Michelle, do you have any questions top of mind? Otherwise, I am seeing some questions in the comments. I know some of you watching right now are asking. We would love to answer those. So continue to throw your comments, your questions in the comments. Dave and I will do our best to bring them up as well. But I know, Michelle, if you had anything top of mind before we got to those, we can start there.
Well, I'm thinking about specific feedback. So a student turns in those 3 questions. And I think that with beginning and progressing, I can probably find some specific feedback to give to them to tell them where to go the next day or what to think about the next day. But it's really with kids who've met mastery or kids who are above and beyond. I want to find some good specific feedback for them or trying to find ways to push them a little bit further the next day.
Interesting. So your perspective of your question right now is, okay, for the students that are struggling, I know exactly how to support them hypothetically. However, for the students that are doing everything they need to do, how can I use questioning or feedback to challenge them to reach further? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Yeah.
I find, Michelle and Dave, I'm sure you have so many different ideas here, but for me, Michelle, all of that has to do with celebrating their knowledge thus far and not accepting the standard as meaning the end result. To me, as the teacher, my job is for them to meet the standard. But when a student approaches a standard, I'm not saying, oh my gosh, congratulations, you've done everything I need. Oh, and by the way, here's more work. Like,
right.
My mindset's like, we have more time to learn, therefore we should learn. And I actually love to do that by not only celebrating what they've learned, but giving them a new prompt to explore. And that prompt, as they continue in their development, should be more and more and more open-ended. Because I have seen students run so far with enrichment projects because I simply celebrated their learning and then challenged it with a prompt that allowed them the freedom to explore further with a few checkpoints for me to just confirm that their learning is going well as they progress. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes. Thank you.
Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess just to clarify a few things. So when we say the standards are articulated so that we know what the end of year assessment from the state or the feds is going to look like. That's it. It's an arbitrary point in time so that we can make sure that students are continuing to progress on their journey. But another analogy, I run a lot, and in order to qualify for the Boston Marathon every year, you have to meet a standard. But they say that is the minimum qualification. But if you really want to guarantee that you get in, blow that standard out of the water, and then show up on race day and go even better. That doesn't mean that's the fastest anybody on earth can ever run. They simply say, this is the standard. You want to get in, meet that standard. It's the same thing for us in our classrooms. We know that that's the level of the assessment at the end of the year. There is nobody on planet Earth that said that's the end of learning. And nobody has told us that should be the end of our teaching. That's just where the assessment ends. But what we know is what we assess is what we teach. And since we know that's what's going to be assessed, oftentimes in our heads, we say, okay, that's as far as I have to teach. But it's not. It is simply a progression on a journey. And if you're in a state that's got standards that are rooted in the Common Core or in the next gen science standards, one of the beautiful things, whether we agree or disagree on the standards, one of the beautiful things about those standards is that they are written on a progression that is end of learning based. So they take what's graduation based and they work it backwards. So 12th grade, 11th grade, 10th grade, and we know the progression. And when we say a student that gets a 4 on a rubric and a 3 might be proficient, that 4 is next year's learning. It's what they should be learning in the future year. A 2 on that rubric should be what they should have learned last year. We can see this progression because the standards are based off of Webb's and Bloom's. So when you're struggling to say, what do I do? Reach out to your counterparts that teach the grade level above and say, how can I support these students who are coming to you next year so that they are better prepared?
The other thing I want to add to that, Dave, is sometimes if I am thinking through what the standard is asking, I personally, and I know, Michelle, you teach a multitude of subjects, but for me personally, there are some standards that simply require basic low-level knowledge, and you met the standard. And I love to incorporate not only real-world situations for that knowledge in their progression of learning, whether they need to know it or not, but then allowing them to explore other real-world examples of that same tool. May not be exactly what they're learning in higher levels, but it is going to further their understanding of the topic overall. So as you begin to think about what type of ideas could be enrichment or above and beyond practices, it's not only the thought process of like, cool, in 2 grade levels, where are they going to need this information? But in our communities, where is this information learned, and how can I just foster them exploring that topic?
Yes.
That's a great idea. I love that.
Very cool. Any other questions that come to mind before we jump over? I see that Destiny is posting some awesome questions in here. Yeah. If you're watching right now, or even if you're watching after the fact, feel free to throw your comments in here. We're just having an open dialogue, so this isn't scripted in any way. Michelle, you're doing awesome.
Yeah.
Questions so far. Thank you for bringing this to us. So we're just excited to keep the conversation going.
So, Michelle, I am curious. So I know that it got planted in your head because of this transition to remote learning and trying to truly standardize outcomes and expectations for students. Is your hope that when things transition back to face-to-face instruction full time, is this something that continues to go, or are you really looking for how I apply this right now in my current reality?
Well, right now in my current reality, and then continue it with further practice, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about collecting student evidence right now, Rae asked that amazing question about what does your teaching really look like right now? What is your instructional design? What does assessment look like right now in your classroom? Is it practice? Is there homework? Is it weekly quizzes? Is it labs? What does it look like in a middle school science class or AVID class or any of the classes you teach?
Well, I'm really focusing on science right now, and then I want to continue into leadership and AVID. But with science, assessment right now is we take 2 weeks on a lesson, and then at the end of the second week, we'll give them a project organizer to kind of put their thinking through on that. I've also asked some reflection questions for them to think about and how to put what they've learned into, the real world or the world around us. Done different things like that.
That's amazing. Yeah. When you're planning those 2 weeks of instruction, how do you decide what goes into the 10 days or the 9 days that you're building a unit?
Good question.
Well, very good question. We're kind of struggling with that right now.
Okay.
it's been, we as a sixth grade, all of the sixth grade teachers in the district have gotten together to try and plan lessons together so that we kind of get an idea of how to do, we're 100% remote. So, and we meet with kids synchronously twice a week. So we're trying to figure out how to get information to them so that they can think about it and struggle with it a little bit, but yet they don't see us for a couple of days.
Right.
So, we do a lot of videos that we, post to the kids. We do give them a phenomena to think about and to try and pose questions with that. How is that working? What are you thinking about that? Like I said, we're doing, we're trying different things every week. We do a lot of creating slides, drag and drops for them to classify and categorize things.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. So one of the things that I used to struggle with when I was a classroom teacher is I would teach for 2 or 3 weeks. And then on a Wednesday or Thursday night, I would go home and go back through my lesson plans and figure out all the lessons I did and create a test or a quiz based on all the stuff I taught, and then give that to the kids on a Friday. And in essence, I was assessing their ability to pay attention to my teaching, which my teaching may not have been aligned to the standards in any way, shape, or form. It was just what Schmittou decided to pontificate on for 2 weeks, and I wanted to know if they were paying attention. And like it, I'll be very honest. I'll tell you, most of the time, it was based off of just whatever was on my mind to teach them for 2 weeks, not necessarily what I was supposed to be teaching according to standards. So maybe a piece of guidance for you is, as we think, I don't know what today's date is, February 7th. Think through on February 17th, 10 days from now. In 10 days, what should your students know? Just chunk it in 2 weeks. So I'm not saying give the kids a pre-test or a post-test, but 2 weeks from now, in 2 weeks, could you write down 3 things that all students in your classes should know within the next 10 days? And then before you even start teaching, look at those 3 things and say, how can I figure out if they know these? 10 days from now, what can I do to figure out if they know these? And then once that is planned, then you start building your instruction to go towards that. So that is truly standards-based instruction, standards-based assessment. You begin with the outcome in mind and you build towards that. And what you might notice is that some of your kids are there in 3 days. Some of your kids might be there in 2 weeks, but at least you know where you're going. And then you can start to choose your own adventure book and figure out where kids go and when they go there. But have an end goal in mind first.
Love it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we
Dave,
try to work on. Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, if you think through that, so we said 10 days, 3 things. So 3 things. That could be one standard that has a lot of meat in it that you want to break down. I mean, if you've got some standard where they're asking students have to be able to understand chemical reactions and predict the outcome of I don't know what it could be. You might have to teach chemical reactions. You might need to talk about solutions and basis. I'm not a science teacher. I don't know. I'm just making up words. But then when you know what the outcome is, maybe if your outcome is students have to create their own lab or students have to be able to demonstrate, students have to be able to analyze, that helps you unpack all it. It's like, I know in 2 weeks, I'm going to be baking a cake. What do I need to go shopping for? You've got to know what you're baking before you go shopping.
And think about it, Dave. Think about how much easier it's going to be to give feedback now because you know exactly in 2 weeks where you need them. So if you know, like, hey, I really need the student to be able to make observations and analyze and in a specific area, then your feedback is now going to only be on where we're trying to get within the next 2 weeks, which, Michelle, I know we touched on, but I actually much prefer Dave's explanation of how to do this from our phone call, because for me, I'm focusing like, okay, Michelle, pick your standard, break it down, decide what questions you need to ask. Dave's talking about something that's so manageable to so many educators. 2 weeks from now, what do you want your students to be able to do? Being able to give feedback on that now, to me, seems so much more manageable than looking at a big, chunky, hefty standard and breaking that down, which might be some practices that some educators take. But in this instance, 2 weeks is a perfect time to do that.
I love that. that you said break it down into 3 pieces, because sometimes, like you said, the standards are huge. And so we look at it and think, okay, how are we going to see all of this in 2 weeks or whatever the unit is? So just looking for 3 things, that's awesome.
So here's an analogy, but real life. So again, not necessarily advocating for rubrics or grids or anything, but real life. So I used to be a building principal, and I would go in and I would observe teachers on a daily basis. I'm popping into classrooms and giving teachers feedback on their teaching. My goal was to figure out if they were good teachers and where they were good, where their strengths were, and how I could support them. If I said, what is a good teacher? There are a lot of things that go into being a good teacher. Now, in my districts, we always use the Danielson framework, which has 22 indicators, right? 22 different components of being a good teacher. If I'm in a teacher's classroom for 10 minutes, am I going to be able to give them high quality feedback on 22 things? No way. So what I do is I go in with a laser focus and say, I'm going to go look for 3 things. Every time I'm in a teacher's classroom, I'm looking for 3 things. And when I see those 3 things, I'm out. If I see 3 things in 10 minutes, I'm done. If it takes me an hour, I'm there for an hour. So, and then I have to go back often to make sure I'm filling in the gaps, right? Go ahead. Sorry.
Hey, Dave, is your lucky number 3? I'm finding a theme. I think Michelle and I, an intervention. Like, do you know that there are more numbers besides 3?
But 3 is a magical number with grading and assessment. I hate statistics, and I know a lot of people hate statistics, but I think a lot of us hate it because it's something we never learned. We were too busy taking Algebra 2 and pre-calc instead of statistics. That's a preaching for another day. But 3 is a powerful number in statistics. I mean, think about how many times you see 3 in the real world. Our government relies on 3 branches of government, 3 layers of government. We talk about triangulation of data. Yep, I'm a loser, stat nerd. Just remember 3, the holy trinity of grading. If you can see things 3 times, you're good.
If you're
That's a t-shirt.
If you're watching right now, could you put 3 green hearts in the chat for Dave? He's in need of not only the green heart love, but strictly 3 or anything divisible by 3. I think that will be fine too. Guys, we've been live for 31 minutes. In my mind, I'm like, perfect. We'll talk about this for a half an hour. I don't know how I thought that we would actually be able to get through your questions, Michelle, in half an hour. I have loved this conversation so far, but for those of you who are maybe just popping in, make sure to share this thread if you know people in your family, in your network would value just talking shop about grading, because they all need to connect with Dave and Michelle to continue this conversation. But also feel free to post your comments in the chat, because I know there are some comments here we will eventually get to. I just really appreciate, Michelle, being able to focus on yours first, because this was all sparked from you choosing to take a course in the academy, read a few books and say, I want more. And truly, you just like scheduled a phone call with me, which thank God you did, because I had to connect you with Dave Schmidt.
I appreciate that.
So good.
Michelle, I want to give you one more nugget, and I'm going to shut up because I think there's so many other powerful people here.
Don't you dare shut up.
I'm going to try to connect something that you said to a question that Destiny had. So Destiny had a question based off of ELA in a reading. And in essence, her question was, there's so many things that we have to teach in a reading, or a student, we have to ask so many questions in a big theme or a big novel. And I'm thinking about like in a science class where you've got big labs and big projects that students have to do. My focus on you is focus on, what am I going to say? The focus, right? Focus on the focus, right?
It's the Schmitto thing.
It is.
Focus on the focus.
Within this big lab, think about what are the things that all students need feedback on, and make sure that that is your priority. And that's not everything. All students don't need feedback on everything. Maybe there are 2 things or more that students need feedback on within that lab. And that's where you focus your attention. If other students get extra things and you want to give them feedback on their beautiful handwriting and their penmanship, and go for it, that's fine. But it's like a language arts teacher that feels the need to correct every spelling mistake, add every comma, every exclamation point when you're really looking for characterization. It gets lost. And that's why we get overwhelmed. Focus on the purpose of the activity, give feedback on that, and you're good. And that helps lessen the load.
Just to confirm for all of you listening, there will be a Focus on the Focus t-shirt coming soon to Teach Better swag store. So go check that out. I've actually, no joke, seen the design. It's really cute. Like the first O is a magnifying glass and the second O is like the Teach Better diamond. It's really cute. Ooh. Shout out to Joshua Stamper that put that together last week. But it's a Schmittoism, focus on the focus. I like it. Totally true. Michelle, what other questions can we answer for you? Because I know there's been a lot of conversation in the chat, really just people appreciating that this conversation is starting. So I really just want you to know, Michelle, like, thank goodness that you chose to not only explore this new thing to support your students, but you also chose to reach out and say, hey, does anyone else want to continue this conversation? Because we don't learn anything, especially not at this magnitude, overnight, and neither do our students. And I have to tell you that this transformation that I've continued to make, I know Dave has worked years on this as well. It's a process. I still have not mastered it. It is really a mind shift. And then it does have us evaluate so many other things in our practices. So I'm so appreciative that you brought this idea to us to at least begin this conversation, because so many other educators are feeling the same way. And I don't know, I love talking shop about this stuff, and I love doing it with Dave. So I'm in heaven right now. I just want you to know I really appreciate you.
But I'm the same way. And I'll be very honest, Michelle. I first started learning about this back in 2008. Like, I think Rae was in kindergarten, and I was just wrapping up my time in a classroom, and I thought I had all the answers. And if somebody would have asked me, Schmitto, you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4, what kind of grader or assessor are you? I would have said 4. I know what my kids know. I ask myself now, I'm maybe a 2.5, maybe. I mean, the more that you think you know, the more you'll realize you don't know. So just be ready for that journey. But it's an exciting journey. We say we want teachers to be lifelong learners. Nothing makes you a lifelong learner quite like unpacking grading and assessment and feedback. It is a fun journey. Just be ready for it.
Michelle, can you tell me, how are you feeling right now? Because I have an opinion on so much of this conversation, but I mean, this is your first time live with us. You said you were stepping out of your comfort zone to have this conversation. By the way, you've done wonderfully so far. Asking
thank you.
And everything in between. How are you feeling with the feedback that you've gotten so far?
I'm feeling pretty good. I have a couple questions still, but yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it. Yeah, I've been terrified all day. So I'm so glad this is going fine.
Good. You're doing really well. Let's get back into those questions.
Ask Rae. Ask Rae.
Yeah. So ask away, and we'd love to help.
So I think you guys already answered this. When I have a standard that I'm getting ready to teach to my students, I should break that down, is what I think I'm hearing you say, into just little pieces that I'm really going to look for in that standard, and then have that end in mind, what the assessment looks like, and then teach to that, and just look for those 3 things that I've picked for that standard. Am I saying that right?
You are. I'm going to elaborate a bit on it. And you should know, Michelle, maybe full transparency for our network, Dave and I are both very passionate on grading, and we don't always agree. And sometimes we agree a lot. So I'm going to answer, but I'm hoping that Dave jumps in after, saying either, oh no, or hey, or here's another layer to consider. Cool. Strictly 6th grade teacher to 6th grade teacher, Michelle, I take a standard and I look at what I need my students to be able to accomplish. And then I think about what background knowledge they're coming in already as from their 5th grade, from their 4th grade classroom, entering into my 6th grade. So I'm thinking about where do they need to be and where are they entering in, however far that gap is. So I'm using the backwards design then to say, if they need to reach this level, what little chunks here and there do I need to make sure I teach them? So like that backwards design is going to allow me to get exactly to where the majority or even just any student is in my classroom, and work my way up so we can meet that standard with all that scaffolding. And then with that along the way, I love Dave's focus on 3. I think that focus of 3 is not only at the standard level, but actually within every formative assessment I give. So I might give a student a formative assessment 2 days into the unit. And when I say 2 days into the unit, it might be something super small that I'm just looking for those 3 teeny tiny pieces to know that they understand, because they're going to continue to build. And so at the end, when they get to that standard, they're going to know a whole lot of stuff. Maybe I'm only really checking on 3 things though, because throughout that space, I've evaluated them 12 times, little minute conversations, or maybe it's a paper assessment or a Google form or whatever you're using right now in a hybrid remote learning in-person environment. But you're constantly checking in on students' understanding and really circling back. And then that's where I create those mastery level questions. And those mastery questions that I always talk about are questions that if the student understands it, I know they're good. And it could be one question, it could be two questions, it could be three questions. But assuming you can answer those questions, we're good to move forward. And those mastery questions don't only exist at the standard, but exist everywhere all the way through. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Dave,
can I follow up? No, I'm not going to. That was amazing.
Do it.
That was amazing. I'm going to add a layer. This is like, is that tiramisu that's got all those layers and every layer is just yummy and good?
I love tiramisu.
So, and it might be a parallel lane more than a layer. I don't know what it is. So let me go backwards. You said I teach the standards, and I'm going to caution you on that. We assess the standards. Right. One of the reasons that you're asking about feedback is the most powerful instructor, the most powerful teacher you have at your disposal. We create experiences for kids that enable us to provide feedback, which truly turns into instruction. So yes, we assess standards. You have your outcome in mind of how you're going to assess all throughout, like Rae said, and you're constantly assessing. Yet another little paradigm shift that will evolve. Don't try to tackle this tomorrow, but it will evolve. Is that all assessment is used formatively and summatively. Every assessment you do is a way for you to check whether or not students are progressing or not. And you have to have that confidence that every assessment you're giving is quality. So typically what we say is an assessment is a formative assessment to say it's not high quality, it's not very good, it's a quick check. Well, if that's the case, if it's not high quality, we shouldn't be necessarily gauging all of our instructional decisions based off of poor assessment. So if you've got confidence in it enough to shape your instructional craft, then give students credit for it as evidence of learning at any point along the progression. One extra little piece to this is I always begin my assessments at the level of the standard. And this might be a difference. So check me on this one. This might be a difference.
Yeah.
So I hear a lot, and this was something that I started doing early on when I was a first-year principal. I had all of my teachers create these rubrics, and students had to work up this ladder towards proficiency. So let's say it was a 4-point rubric. The level 3 might have been proficiency on all the skills, and all students had to start at level 1 to prove they could do it. Then they moved to a level 2 to prove they could do it. Then they moved to a level 3, so on and so forth. But what ended up happening was so many students got bogged down in those level 1 and level 2 tasks, which tend to be lower level blooms, lower level webs that truly aren't based off of the standard. So for example, maybe a standard says students will be able to analyze blah, 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 blah. Move backwards down blooms or webs, and it's recall or understand. And if students couldn't memorize definitions for words, we weren't allowing them to go and analyze things, and they got stuck there. And teachers realize they're never getting through things because students can't memorize things. Well, guess what? Even on the state assessment, they don't have to, because if it's analyze chemical reactions, blah, 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 on the state assessment, it will say a chemical reaction is blah, blah, blah. Analyze the features and properties. They've never had to memorize it. I was a history teacher for a long time. I can't list all the U.S. presidents. I can't tell you the names of battles in the Civil War, but I can argue constitutional law with you. You don't have to have things memorized in order to apply them and analyze them. So I always start my assessment at the standard level. If they can't do it, then I take them back a level and say, well, can you do this? If you can't do that, then I take you back. So don't make them climb up. Start at the standard and then branch out from there.
I so agree. Yes. All the things, yes. Love it.
That's awesome. Love it.
Michelle, we're having this big conversation, and thank goodness this is recorded, because I'm going to go back and rewatch this.
Yeah, me too.
Michelle, what other questions do you have? I know we've discussed so many things thus far. There's so many comments already coming through of people really evaluating all these different pieces. So your questions have been awesome so far.
Do you pre-assess at the beginning of the unit?
I am a huge advocate for pre-assessment, Dave. I don't know. You smiled, which makes me nervous that you're going to disagree with me.
No, not at all. I'm just going to push back and say pre-what?
So the questions that you ask that are at standard, do you ask those questions at the beginning of the unit?
Yes.
Yes, and if they know it, then there's no unit.
Yes.
Right.
So that's the thing. So it goes back to there's no pre-test or post-test. It might be pre-instruction or post-instruction, post my own belief that the students could only learn it from me. There are some students that learned a lot of things that I didn't teach them, and if they know it before I taught them, sweet, great, move on. You don't need to sit through my class and jump through my hoops. So when we say pre-assessment, post-assessment, we have to determine what's post and what's pre and what's the purpose, because truly every assessment is post-learning, so we can figure out what they know and what they don't and where we're going. They learned something at some point. Otherwise, they wouldn't be sitting in our class. So our goal is to figure out what they know. When they learned it is irrelevant. Who they learned it from is irrelevant. What do they know?
Dave, would it be awkward to have like a Schmitto shrine in my office? That would be weird. I mean, I don't think people will see it, but like maybe in the corner.
It could be like a doll and you rub the head and it spits out Schmittoisms.
That sounds so creepy, but I'm doing it. So good.
So the moral of the story is yes. And that goes down to the whole premise of as well. So all the dirty laundry is coming out when you do this. You'll start realizing, man, I had a lot of arbitrary dates and deadlines. Why did a kid have to learn this in 2 weeks if they already know it? Why can't they learn it in May? Right. Because I had it on my pacing guide for them to learn it in March. Well, that's on you, not on the kid. As long as the kid knows it. Every standard we have in every school at every grade level is an end of year standard. So know that. Every standard is an end of year standard. Because you chose to teach it in September is on you, not the kid. It's an end of year standard. So pre, post, those are completely arbitrary terms.
So fun. Any other questions, Michelle? Go ahead.
So you give the before the unit assessment.
Well played.
Whatever you want to call it. So some of the students have shown that they met mastery, and that's when you then would start asking those open-ended prompts where they're exploring further on kind of their own.
Yeah, Michelle, I think this kind of leans into, if you agree with everything we've talked about as you start to build it, like Dave said, you're essentially opening all these other doors and problems that come with that. So you're saying, oh my gosh, pre-assessment, I'm working towards the standards. I understand all that. I'm going to work towards that. The moment you start to make that shift, you're like, well, crap, what do I do with the kids that are like, it's kind of like ignorance is bliss, right? You're being ignorant to like the 2 or 3 students in the classroom that don't need this unit. But then once you learn it, you're like, nah, now that I have that information, I should do something else for them, right? So I think for me, and I think it's different for every educator, for me, that's why something, and it doesn't have to be the grid method, but something like the grid method is what I needed, because I essentially needed a map, something towards learning. And I don't have every student start at the same spot on that map. Because if Dave comes to me and he says, I already know what I'm doing, well, then I'm skipping to like level 4 and saying, hey, Dave, your adventure begins here. Yeah. And then Michelle, if you come and you're like, what's this thing you speak of? I'm like, okay, cool. You're starting at the beginning of our treasure map at, the pirate ship. So I think that kind of forced me to need some sort of structure, regardless of the structure you choose, where it gave multiple starting points for my students, because that pre-assessment gave me information that they didn't need to go through these other learning opportunities that were designed for students that didn't have that background knowledge. Does that make sense where that mindset came from?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mind blown. Love it.
That is spot on. True. And here's a real world example. And I've used this thousands of times. So just earmuffs if you've heard this before. But I've got 4 kids. Okay. My oldest kid learned how to ride his bike at 5 years old. He was proficient at riding his bike at 5. When I knew that he could ride his bike, I did not then say, okay, you're proficient. Now you go teach all of your siblings how to ride their bike. That was not his next task. I said, cool, you're proficient at riding your bike. Now, his name is not Lance Armstrong. So there is still more he can do. So I said, cool, now you can go around the block without me having to ride with you. Or you can go out and practice doing some jumps. Or you can practice riding no-handed. I said, do what you want to do, dude. You got this. Go show me some cool tricks. Show me what you can do with this foundational knowledge. But your job is not necessarily to do my job for your siblings. If you want to, cool, but you don't have to. I think that's what we do with a lot of our students that are already there. We say, okay, now your job is to help me. No, your job, now that you got the basic standard, and you articulated this at the beginning, that's just that foundation. Now you turn them loose and say, what else can you do? Mm-hmm. Shoot for the stars now. When we landed a person on the moon in 1969, we haven't been there in 50 years. Is it because we're done? We met the standard. That was it. Now we're done. No, now we're saying, let's go to Mars. Let's send ships outside of the solar system. Awesome. You just keep going and going and going. The kids met it. Now they go.
So, Michelle, I will tell you a little way I cheat with this. I don't know if this is helpful or not, and Dave could kill me when I say this, but because I use something that allows me to have the multiple starting points for students, I also, though, have like okay, don't kill me, but I have like an end where we start a new topic together in some capacity. And so up until when we start and when we end, I need to fill that for all of my learners. So the way I do that in my higher levels is by giving those open-ended prompts. And before they begin exploring those open-ended prompts, I do require my students to submit a proposal that they are going to begin as they try to meet that prompt. So for example, if I say, show me a way that this information is used in our real world, but they have 2 weeks left of the unit, then they're not just going to say, oh, I'm going to do a Google search of where ratios are used in the real world. That's not going to be a prompt. That's not going to be a proposal I'm going to accept. I'm going to challenge them to go back and rethink their proposal. I want them, if they have 2 weeks left, to find a community member that uses that skill, reach out to them, find a need that they have in their business, work for them for the next 2 weeks to find how their knowledge in this area can actually help their business grow over the next 2 weeks. Like, I want them to really create an in-depth learning opportunity for themselves, utilizing the skills they have to further help our community or the real world effect of that skill. And so by leaving those more open-ended, make sure you also have the structure as the educator to allow that learning to last the time that you need. Does that make sense? That's more logistical, but.
And I think that's a powerful statement. And I'm so glad that you gave that permission for people to do that, because I think there are so many people that hear the statement about arbitrary dates and deadlines, or you shouldn't have to. Well, arbitrary is the key word. And unfortunately, we live in a system that still has deadlines. We have students for 180 days. We have state assessments. We don't get to necessarily teach kids on Saturdays and Sundays. They have to leave at 3 p.m. every day. Those aren't our rules, but we have to play by some of those. So arbitrary dates, saying you have to learn this in 2 weeks because I give tests every 2 weeks, that's arbitrary. But if you have deadlines because you have to move on, you have to do other things, that is totally fine. And you have to work within that system. Until we get to the place where that system doesn't exist, we live in a box, live in the box.
But put those supports in place. Give yourself permission to put those supports in place to allow for open-ended blueprint that also has structure for you as the educator to ensure that they're getting a full and rich experience. If that's right.
Yes.
Love it. Awesome.
Any other questions that we can touch on tonight, Michelle?
I think you just answered the other one. I was going to say, how do you end? How do you move on to the next one? And you guys just, you answered that one. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that every educator has their own perspective. So I encourage everybody listening. I encourage you to develop your own opinion on this as you continue to dive into so many different progressive practices in our classroom. For me, culturally in my classroom, I really like starting a unit as a family and then concluding a unit as a family. I like that fresh start. It kind of goes back to how I was as a learner. So I think finding systems for that is important as you continue to progress. So it's important. Absolutely.
Especially if your entire team, your entire building, your entire district does not necessarily embrace or hasn't evolved to this yet, because this is going to be brand new for students. You think about how your mind is just racing right now. You introduce some of this to students and they're going to say, whoa, this isn't how we play school. And you need to make sure that you can still keep some sort of control and semblance of what they're used to. Otherwise, it'll be complete anarchy and you're going to lose it all and you're going to have mass rebellion. So give yourself permission. Take some baby steps. Have deadlines. Where do you want to be in 10 days, 1 month, whatever the case may be, and work towards it. It's totally fine and it's totally healthy and you'll be so stinking proud of yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Michelle, you've asked some incredible questions. I do want to make sure people can continue to connect with you. So I'm going to have you actually share your Twitter handle, your Instagram handle, whatever, so they can continue this conversation. But then also, Michelle, we really want an update on how this goes. So please don't be a stranger. Please, please, please don't be a stranger. We so appreciate you coming live with us. Michelle, how can people stay connected to you on this topic?
So I'm on Twitter at Simmons KLSS. Yeah, my last name Simmons, KLSS. And then I just joined Instagram and it's still working and I don't even remember my Instagram so right now, so I don't know.
I'll find you. I'll tell the world. No worries.
Awesome.
Yes. Michelle, thank you for joining us. We are going to actually be right back here for just a few more minutes to talk through what's going on in our admin mastermind that we have every single Tuesday. We actually have it twice on Tuesdays every single week. So we are going to say goodbye to Michelle and then also celebrate a little bit more about our Teach Better administrators, what conversations are happening and some important topics that are coming up. So stick with us. Make sure to share this thread if you haven't done so already, if you think this would be valuable for anyone you're connected with, because Michelle, you asked some incredible questions and I can only imagine the teachers that are going to get value from this. So we'll be right back. Dave.
Can I just say thank you? Oh my gosh.
So cool.
She was amazing. Oh my gosh. That gives me so much hope. That was so good. She was so good. So
Dave,
good.
when Michelle called me earlier this week, I was like, oh my gosh, is there any way? And I said this, I was in the car driving. I remember exactly where I was. I was like, is there any way you would come live with me and Dave? And she was like, maybe. And I'm like, sleep on it and then email me immediately when you wake up and tell me you're going to do it.
I kind of feel like we need to put a date on the calendar and say, let's do a checkup with Michelle. Like not an arbitrary date, but let's just put something out there and then circle back and give her a deadline and see where it goes.
I love that, Dave, because I've been, texting her. I'm going to obviously follow up with her after this conversation, but holy moly, talk about an educator that wants to do good work. Mm-hmm. And I know, Dave, you do so much PD on this topic. I know that secretively, although I'm not spilling any beans, we are going to continue to ensure that you are doing PD on this topic for our incredible Teach Better family. So this was such a great example of being able to have those rich conversations. I love that stuff.
I love when people reach out for the right reasons and say, she didn't say I'm being forced to change. She said, I want to be able to give better feedback to kids because I know it matters. Can you help? I mean, oh my gosh, it's so good. Yes. Loved it.
Well, Dave, we've already been live for 57 minutes. No joke. I know we thought we were going to answer Michelle's questions in, 20, 30 minutes and we'll have so much time to talk.
Have you met us?
I know. I was so wrong. And Michelle was so incredible with her questions that we were not going to cut that short. So I just want to spend a few minutes.
Yeah.
The admin mastermind that happens twice a day on Tuesdays every single week is something where administrators from around the world come and talk shop. And when I say around the world, I know it's truly around the stinking world that this group comes together to talk shop. I would love to know if there were any themes or a key takeaway that you think would be of value to our Teach Better family.
So I'll start with, and I know I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again. Every week there are new people. And Rae, you came on Tuesday and you met somebody in our evening group who said they came for the first time because they listened to this recap on the podcast. And they said, well, you said that there's always somebody new and you're not going to put them in the spotlight and embarrass them. So I decided to come. And what that person doesn't know is she was not the only new person there. There's always somebody new. There's always somebody's new that join us. And I love that. If you are hungry, if you're just looking for questions, if you want to have a conversation, you just want to remember that you're not alone, join us. It is free. You hang out with just some of the best educators from around the world. We're talking Nepal, Guatemala, Canada, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, everywhere. You said in the last segment, 3 is my favorite number. It's 50 is my favorite number with the mastermind because we've been hovering around 50 people at our mastermind groups the last couple of weeks. It's been incredible.
Dave, it's so funny because I am not able to make every mastermind, which I know a lot of people who are registered at teachbetter.com/mastermind, they're registered, but they can't come every week. There's a meeting that pops up, that there's no shame in that. If you're listening and you're like, oh, I feel so badly. I signed up for something I can't go to. This is a fluid conversation. But what I was going to say is because I can't make it to all of them, I actually never know who's new because for all I know on the week that I didn't come, they're a regular. So I loved being able to pop in and have conversations with people that I either was familiar with or met for the first time and just continue to connect with. So it was so fun being able to pop in this Tuesday. And actually, Dave, I popped in because your icebreaker, which I know you always do an icebreaker, so people get talking right off the bat. Your icebreaker was to share appreciation. And I had a message from the morning mastermind of somebody saying something wonderful about me. So then I popped in for the evening mastermind just because it was top of mind. So it was so fun to be a part of.
Well, let me also caution administrators out there that might be like me and like, oh, seriously, it's one of those where there's cheesy icebreakers. No, we don't sit around and hold virtual hands and sing Kumbaya. So that's not what it is. We don't share social security numbers and credit card numbers. It's truly, we just spend a couple minutes saying, hey, my name is in some capacity and sharing something about ourselves just so that we can make some connections. Because the mastermind group, yes, we meet on Tuesdays, but we form these connections that last beyond the Tuesdays. And that's what we do. And then we dive in and start solving problems of practice. And it's fun.
So, Dave, I know that we are going to transition into maybe a theme or a really important takeaway that we've had from the mastermind before we end our Sunday chat tonight, strictly for the sake of icebreakers, because you brought that up. I attended a Speakers Network event, which is the Teach Better Speakers Network. If you guys aren't familiar, go to teachbetter.com/speakers network. You can see all the amazing people part of it. But there was a get together on Saturday, and the icebreaker that Becky Schnexer kind of shared with the group was a superpower that you would like to have. And it was so cheesy, but holy moly, the answers were good. So I'm going to throw that at you before we get started. Dave, what would be your superpower you would choose? Only one.
Ooh.
Only one.
Superpower I would choose would be to be invisible. And this is, and but hold on. So here's vulnerability. And here's why sometimes these cheesy questions, it really allow you to get to know somebody. I hate being in a crowded room and feeling invisible unless I choose it. If I could choose when I want to be invisible and when I want people to notice me, I would love that.
Okay, that is the best evaluation for that answer that I've ever heard. Because there were Speakers Network members that chose invisibility, and I'm going to call out Kevin Butler, who's one of them. He was like, I want to be invisible because I can get away with stuff. I'm like, Kevin, that makes you sound creepy, just so you know. That makes sense. And it was like so funny. We joked with him the whole time about it. Your answer is very strategic. I like that.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah. And you're going to answer that for yourself in a minute, but
I can't wait to see what the icebreaker is this week. So if you're watching right now and you want to come to the admin mastermind, go to teachbetter.com/admin/mastermind. No admin.
There you go. Yeah. Just mastermind.
Go sign up, and then you can know what the icebreaker is this week.
And when we meet, it's not just icebreakers. We spend 10, 15 minutes with that. And mostly that's just because we know administrators, leaders are busy, and that gives everybody time to find their way to us.
Yeah.
And then we jump in. And that's when we break out into these breakout rooms and have these deep conversations, or sometimes there's very practical conversations where leaders from around the country and world say, here's something I'm struggling with. Here's what my teachers need. Any suggestions, any solutions, any conversations. And we spend 35, 40, 45 minutes just diving in and helping solve those problems and offering our perspectives and solutions. Because it's so hard being a leader when you feel like you're alone and you have to have all the answers. So getting other people to weigh in is so powerful. And this week, although we're only in February, the big conversation, ironically, based off of our last conversation, revolved around assessments. Administrators are freaking out right now across the country because the big state assessments are coming up, and they're wondering, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I support my teachers when they are freaking out, feeling like all this accountability is crashing down on them on this crazy year? Because I know, Ray, we've talked about this a lot. Administrators oftentimes feel like they're trapped. And oftentimes teachers look at their building principal, building administrator, and say, it's your fault, or you're the one putting this pressure on me. These principals were reaching out saying, I don't know how to help support my teachers right now. How do I take this data and make it useful and relevant when we all know it might not be all that useful and relevant? How do I balance this? And that was the conversation. It was really good.
It's a really important topic right now. I'm so glad that there's a safe space for people to discuss it, because from my perspective, if you're a leader in any capacity, but even if you're a decision maker in any capacity, being able to have a healthy conversation around this idea and get strategies from those around you, whether they be around you physically or just truly like around the world, who are able to share in this struggle, I think is so important. And there's not an easy go-to answer, but there are things you can do right now that would be helpful. And so why not collect all those and try and be a little bit better today than you were yesterday and a little bit better tomorrow than you were today. It's good.
That's it. And the moral of the story for people that wonder, like, what are they supposed to do with this assessment? The reality, every assessment we always give is a yeah, but assessment. It's an assessment you give and you're like, yeah, but, because you always have these other things that, impacted positive or negative. Yeah. This assessment's no different. Yeah. See, yeah, it's a yeah, but assessment. So take it with a grain of salt. No assessment is perfect. No assessment is completely valid or invalid. It's only our interpretations. So figure out how you're going to position yourself before the results come, before you give the assessment, and go with it. Figure it out now before the assessments come, because if you get amazing scores, are you going to celebrate that? I don't know. Are you? If you get horrible scores, are you going to condemn that? Figure it out now before the time comes, and then go.
I love it. Dave, I so appreciate you joining me now for these biweekly family check-in, Admin Mastermind Rewind Sunday nights. I know it's a mouthful because we have these two ideas that we're putting together, but I love taking Sunday and not only recapping the valuable conversations that are already happening in our communities, but also then taking questions and being able to foster positive energy with a brainstorming, solution-minded discussion for our coming week. So you have no idea how much I appreciate you. I love all your insight. You're always somebody to celebrate. And I know that you need to go back to the Super Bowl because you're hoping that Florida wins, and I'm hoping they lose. So
it's Tampa Bay. We have to clarify which Florida team just for Tom Brady. And the reason I like Tom Brady, TB12. It's all about TB12. Teach Better 12, TB12 out. I'm just saying TB12. That's the only reason I like Tampa Bay. Look at Tampa Bay, TB.
Do you know
TB?
You know what the score is right now? Is we're like been live for an hour and 6 minutes. Oh, are you gonna watch it? Okay, I won't mess you up. You're gonna watch. See,
Don't you dare! That is just mean, Rae.
I just want to know who wins. I'm going Chiefs. All right, guys, we got to get Dave back to his football. Thank you for joining us here for our discussion, Dave. I think the world of you, and I hope that your team loses. For everybody else, feel free to hang out with the Teach Better team. We have ambassador applications opening on Monday, which is tomorrow. Holy moly.
February 8th, yes.
They open at 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning on Monday, and they are open the entire month through February 27th. So please continue to be involved in the Teach Better family. We have blogs publishing every single day, which is what we've said for the past year. Now, as of 2021, we have a multitude of blogs publishing every single day. So if you're looking for new ideas, if you're looking for new concepts, we have blogs, podcasts, academy courses, and so many things in between to support you. So please continue to get involved as the Teach Better team continues to support every educator all across the world, because we love you and we're a family. So fun. Dave, any final words before I click the button to play the video thingy?
No, that's a lot. Ambassador, I'm just going to do my mental checklist. Ambassador applications tomorrow, February 8th, open for a couple of weeks. I don't remember the final day, 27th maybe? Okay, yep. February 8th through 27th. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, February 8th through 27th, yep. You've got the book bundle giveaway. If you follow Teach Better on Twitter, at Teach Better, tag your favorite edu book and at Teach Better and get in the running for a book bundle.
That's happening February 9th through the 11th. So that's also this week, guys. Also this week.
I know we got Chad that's going to be starting a cool grid series coming up soon. I mean, there's just so much stinking amazingness.
Sharing secrets, so Dave. Gotta get out of here. Bye, guys. Love you.